Hello students, welcome to the lecture on international trade, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain international trade and the world economy, discuss various trade reforms announced in India in recent times, understand balance of payments, explain foreign direct investment, define Exin Policy, explain World Trade Organization. Let's begin with a brief introduction to international trade. International trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries. This type of trade gives rise to a world economy in which prices of supply and demand affect and are affected by global events. Political change in Asia, for example, could result in an increase in the cost of labor, thereby increasing the manufacturing cost for an American sneaker company based in Malaysia, which would then result in an increase in the price that you have to pay to buy the tennis shoes at your local mall. A decrease in the cost of labor, on the other hand, would result in you having to pay less for your new shoes. Trading globally gives consumers and countries the opportunity to be exposed to goods and services not available in their own countries. Almost every kind of product can be found on the international market: food, clothes, spare parts, oil, jewelry, wine, stocks, currencies, and water. Services are also traded: tourism, banking, consulting, and transportation. A product that is sold to the global market is an export, and a product that is bought from the global market is an import. Imports and exports are announced for in a country's current account in the balance of payments. International trade is the buying and selling of goods and services across national borders or territories, allowing both the buyers and seller to expand their markets for goods and services that otherwise may not be made available to them. Let us see how world economy can affect our business in India. But let us understand these terms more nicely. Integration into the world economy has proven a powerful means for countries to promote economic growth, development, and poverty reduction. Over the past 20 years, the growth of the world trade has averaged 6% per year, twice as fast as world output. But trade has been an engine of growth for much longer. Since 1947, when the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT) was created, the world trading system has benefited from 8 rounds of multilateral trade liberalization as well as from unilateral and regional liberalization. Indeed, the last of these 8 rounds led to the establishment of the World Trade Organization to help administer the growing body of multilateral trade agreements.
Half the world's population live in poverty. These 2.8 billion people worldwide, who are living on less than $2 a day, could work themselves out of poverty if trade was fair. However, trade is unfair. Take the country of Kenya, for example. In the 1970s, Kenya's future looked bright, with a growing economy and an industry starting to thrive. However, in the 1980s, for the return of aid from rich countries, strict liberalization was enforced. The government had to reduce support for its farmers, cut tariffs, and deregulate markets. And yet when Kenya wanted entry into the WTO in the 1990s, further liberalization was expected. Cheap, often subsidized goods from richer countries flooded the markets, from shoes and sugar to steel. The result has been fatal for Kenya's young industries, and their vulnerable farmers didn't stand a chance in competition with rich, powerful companies and countries. Moving to the 21st century, Kenya now faces the future with devastated industries, mass unemployment, and a generation without education. More Kenyans live in poverty now than they did in the 1970s. Fewer children go to school, fewer children are vaccinated, and more children die. Around the world, many artisans and producers of products such as cotton, cocoa, coffee, tea, and handcrafts are marginalised due to the regulations put in place by large Western governments. This happens because more than 99% of world trade is conducted by the West, through rich governments and large companies and corporations, including the World Trading Organization and the World Banking Organization. They control the way trade is conducted through agreements and rules that they have created to protect their own interests. Not only do these imposed trade regulations allow cheap products to be dumped on poor countries' fledgling markets, they charge high taxes on imported goods so poor countries can only afford to export raw materials like cocoa and cotton. It is the rich who turn these into more valuable products and reap the rewards. Kenya is not alone. Poor countries only account for 0.4% of global trade. This makes them powerless to fight back. Trade rules need to change. The rules need to allow the 2.8 billion people living on less than $2 a day the chance to work themselves out of poverty.
The resulting integration of the world economy has raised living standards around the world. Most developing countries have shared in this prosperity. In some, incomes have risen dramatically. As a group, developing countries have become much more important in world trade. They now account for 1/3 of world trade, up from about a quarter in the early 1970s. Many developing countries have substantially increased their export of manufactures and services relative to traditional commodity exports. Manufactures have risen to 80% of developing country exports. Moreover, trade between developing countries has grown rapidly, with 40% of the exports now going to other developing countries. The benefits of trade liberalization. Policies that make an economy open to trade and investment with the rest of the world are needed for sustained economic growth. The evidence on this is clear. No country in recent decades has achieved economic success in terms of substantial increases in living standards for its people without being open to the rest of the world. In contrast, trade opening along with opening to foreign direct investment has been an important element in the economic success of East Asia, where the average import tariff has fallen from 30% to 10% over the past 20 years. Reaping the benefits. The failure to start a new round of multilateral trade negotiation at the WTO conference in Seattle in 1999 was a setback for the international trading system. Such broad-based multilateral negotiations are particularly important because they provide an opportunity for countries to gain visible benefits for their exporters from market opening by others. This prospect provides an added incentive for countries to open their own markets and to overcome opposition from the entrenched interests benefiting from protection. In this way, the packages of trade liberalization measures that result for these negotiations are assured of benefiting all of the participating countries. Free trade zones. The free trade zones has been overtaken by events. Now that NAFTA, GATT and duty rate reduction have removed many barriers to trade, some major changes have taken place in the international trade landscape. And so it is a good time to review the role of free trade zones and their future under the new trading system. For all of their history, free trade zones have been established to evade or reduce duties and traffics, often used to defer duties up to the point of manufacturing or consumption. They have served chiefly as bonded warehouses in the United States, with items held in storage only to be released on an as-needed basis. Unlike many of their foreign counterparts, manufacture is forbidden within the American Free Trade Zone. Assembly, known by the trade term manipulation, is a permissible use. Let us now talk about the various trade reforms which has happened in recent. Trade policy reform has also made progress, though the pace has been slower than in industrial liberalization. Before the reforms, trade policy was characterized by high tariffs and pervasive import restriction. Imports of manufactured consumer goods were completely banned. For capital goods, raw materials and intermediates, certain lists of goods were freely importable, but for most items where domestic substitutes were being produced, imports were only possible with import licenses. The criteria for issue of licenses were non-transparent, delays were endemic, corruption unavoidable. Economic reforms sought to phase out import licensing and also to reduce import duties. Import licensing was abolished relatively early for capital goods and intermediates, which became freely importable in 1993 simultaneously with the switch to a flexible exchange rate regime. Import licensing had been traditionally defended on the grounds that it was necessary to manage the balance of payments, but the shift to a flexible exchange rate enabled the government to argue that any balance of payments impact would be effectively dealt with through exchange rate flexibility. Although India's tariff levels are significantly lower than in 1991, they remain among the highest in the developing world because most other developing countries have also reduced tariffs in this period. The weighted average import duty in China and Southeast Asia is currently about half the Indian level. The government has announced that average tariffs will be reduced to around 15% by 2004, but even if this is implemented, tariffs in India will be much higher than in China, which has committed to reduce weighted average duties to about 9% by 2005 as a condition for admission to the World Trade Organization. Let us now discuss the balance of payment. The balance of payments (BOP) records all of the many financial transactions that are made between consumers, businesses and the government in India with people across the rest of the world. The BOP figures tells us about how much is being spent by Indian consumers and firms on imported goods and services, and how successful India firms have been in exporting to other countries and markets. It is an important measure of the relative performance of the India in the global economy. At AS level, we focus only on one part of the balance of payment account. This section is known as the current account. A country's international transactions are recorded in the balance of payments accounts. A country's balance of payments has three components: the current account, the financial account, and the capital account. India's balance of payment on current account worsened by $26 billion to $69.2 billion in the first 6 months, April to September of 2008 fiscal year. This reflects deterioration in the balance of trade, with imports rising faster than exports. Here are some measures to improve balance of payments, reduce domestic consumption, encourage depreciation of rupees, structural improvements. Can you tell me the full form of FDI and how is it going to affect Indian economy? Let us discuss. Foreign direct investment (FDI) is now recognized as an important driver of growth in the country. Government is therefore making all efforts to attract and facilitate FDI and investment from non-resident NRIs, including overseas corporate bodies (OCBs) that are predominantly owned by them, to complement and supplement domestic investment. To make the investment in India attractive, investments and returns on them are freely repatriable except where the approval is subject to specific conditions such as lock-in period on original investment, dividend cap, foreign exchange neutrality, etc. as per the notified sectoral policy. The condition of dividend balancing that was applicable to FDI in 22nd specified consumer goods industry stands withdrawn for dividends declared after 14 July 2000, the date on which press note number 7 of 2000 series was issued. Foreign direct investment is freely allowed in all sectors including the services sector, except a few sectors where the existing and notified sectorial policy does not permit FDI beyond a ceiling. FDI for virtually all items or activities can be brought in through the automatic route under powers delegated to the Reserve Bank of India (RBI), and for the remaining items activities through government approval. Government approvals are accorded on the recommendation of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board (FIPB). Foreign Investment Implementation Authority (FIIA) was established on 9/8/1999 to assist the foreign investors in getting necessary approvals and thereby facilitating quick translation of foreign direct investment (FDI) approvals into implementation. Fast track. Committees have been set up in 30 ministries, departments for regular review of FDI mega projects with proposed investment of ₹1 billion and above, and resolution of any difficulties in consultation with the concerned ministries or states governments. Unresolved issues are brought before FIIA. Current position of India. Various studies have projected India among the top 5 favored destinations for FDI. Cumulative FDI equity inflows has been ₹5,54,270 crore, 1,27,460 million US$ for the period 1991 to 2009. This is attributed to contribution from service sector, computer, software, telecommunication, real estate, etc. India's 83% of cumulative FDI is contributed by 9 countries, while remaining 17% by rest of the world. Country-wise, FDI inflows to India are dominated by Mauritius 44%, followed by Singapore 9%, United States 8% and UK 4%. Countries like Singapore, USA and UK etc. invest in India mainly in service power, telecommunication fuels, electric equipment, food processing sector. Moving on to our next topic, EXIM policy, that stands for export and import. The EXIM policy, also known as the foreign trade policy, is announced every 5 years by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. It is updated every year on the 31st of March and all the amendments and improvements in the scheme are effective from the 1st of April. EXIM policy deals in general provision pertaining to exports and imports, promotional measures, duty exemption schemes, export promotion schemes, special economic zone programs and other details for different sectors. The government announces a supplement to this policy each year. The Government of India also releases the handbook or procedures detailing the procedures to be followed for each of the schemes mentioned in the EXIM policy. The third 5-year EXIM policy has been formulated with the objective of achieving at least 1% share of world exports by 2006 to 2007 from the present level of 0.67%. The projected export growth means doubling the present export of $46 billion to more than $80 billion over the 10 5-year plan period, requiring a compound annual growth rate of 11.9%. In this context, the commodity country matrix has been expanded from the earlier 15 countries and 15 commodities to 25 countries and 220 export products under the medium term export strategy announced by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The Union budget for the current fiscal has triggered the process of trade liberalization further by keeping the sensitive component of the domestic sector well protected. The customs duty rates are retained at the existing levels of 5%, 15% and 25% with the peak duty rate at 30% as against the earlier 35%. The uniform CE and VAT rate at 16% and special additional duty rate at 4% have been retained. The time span for bringing down the custom duty to zero by 2003 under the Information Technology Agreement has been extended to 2005. The Finance Minister has stated that by the year 2004 to 2005, there would be 2 slabs of customs duty rates of 10% and 20%. On the trade front, export restriction like registration and packaging requirements are removed on butter, wheat and wheat products, coarse grains, groundnut oil and cashew exports to Russia under rupee debt repayment scheme. Quantitative and packaging restrictions on wheat and its products, butter, pulses, grain and flour of barley, maize, bajra, ragi and jowar have also been abolished. Export of all cultivated varieties of seed with the exception of onion and jute is allowed. Can you tell me when did WTO came into existence? Let me tell you. The World Trade Organization WTO came into being in 1995, one of the youngest of the international organization. One of the youngest of the international organization, the WTO is a successor to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade GATT, established in the wake of the Second World War. So while the WTO is still young, the multilateral trading system that was originally set up under GATT is well over 50 years old. The past 50 years have seen an exceptional growth in world trade. Merchandise exports grew on average by 6% annually. Total trade in 2000 was 22 times the level of 1950. GATT and the WTO have helped to create a strong and prosperous trading system, contributing to unprecedented growth. The system was developed through a series of trade negotiation or rounds held under GATT. The first rounds dealt mainly with tariff reductions, but later negotiation included other areas such as anti-dumping and non-tariff measures. The last round, the 1986 to 94 Uruguay round, led to the creation of WTO. The negotiation did not end there. Some continued after the end of the Uruguay round. The February 1997 agreement was reached on telecommunication services, with 69 governments agreeing to wide-ranging liberalization measures that went beyond those agreed in the Uruguay round. The WTO's overriding objective is to help trade flow smoothly, freely, fairly and predictably. It does this by administering trade agreements, acting as a forum for trade negotiation, settling trade dispute, reviewing national trade policies, assisting developing countries in trade policy issues through technical assistance and training programs. Cooperating with other international organizations. The WTO has nearly 150 members, accounting for over 97% of world trade. Around 30 others are negotiating membership. Decisions are made by the entire membership. This is typically by consensus. A majority vote is also possible, but it has never been used in the WTO and was extremely rare under the WTO's predecessor, GATT. The WTO's agreement have been ratified in all members' parliaments. The WTO's top-level decision-making body is the Ministerial Conference, which meets at least once every 2 years. The WTO Secretariat, based in Geneva, has around 600 staff and is headed by a Director General. Its annual budget is roughly 160 million Swiss francs. It does not have branch offices outside Geneva. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Greater efforts by industrial countries and the international community more broadly are called for to remove the trade barriers facing developing countries, particularly the poorest countries. The IMF considers a successful trade round to be an important step toward meeting the goal of making globalization work for the benefit of all. Official BOP statistics as compiled by the RBI for the year 2001 to 2 are available so far only for the first half of the year. The literature on FDI and economic growth generally points to a positive relationship between the two variables and offers several standard explanations for it. The GATT was a set of rules, a multilateral agreement with no institutional foundation, only a small associated secretariat which had its origin in the attempt to establish an international trade organization in the 1940s. The WTO's top-level decision-making body is a ministerial conference which meets at least once every 2 years.